get my slides up. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organisers for inviting me to talk today. My presentation is not quite as advertised for a number of reasons which I'll go into. I've had lots of funding, or the ITC project has, from lots of sources, and I don't have any conflicts of interest, except I'm interested in stopping people dying. The ITC project, for those who aren't aware of it, is a project that started in 2002 with the aim of evaluating policies and mass disseminated interventions. It started out in 4 countries, the US, UK, Canada and Australia, and has extended to somewhere close to 30 countries now which have some version of the ITC project. I'm only going to be talking about data from the 4 countries mentioned. What we do is follow cohorts of smokers and recent quitters in different countries. We have a common methodology, as common as we can. In some countries it has to be face-to-face, in others it has to be telephone, and we've moved to exclusively web-based surveying in the more developed countries. Whereas we assess mediational pathways, so it's a pathway by which a policy may have its impact, and in a sense we have an embedded set of natural experiments. When a policy changes in one country, we can see what happens in relation to other countries where the policy hasn't changed at that time or hasn't changed at all. So we can demonstrate differential effects when a policy is introduced. The project now has a major focus on vaping. We first asked questions about vaping in 2010 survey, and it was extended to questions we've asked each wave. And in the 2016 survey, which I'm going to be predominantly talking about, it's the primary focus of the survey. The 2016 survey, we changed our sampling method slightly. Originally, we just recruited smokers and retained ex-smokers. Now we're recruiting anybody who has essentially used nicotine in the last 2 years, defined as having smoked or vaped in the last 2 years. The focus of this presentation is going to be on 11,146 respondents from those 4 countries, less in Australia than in the other 3. And what I'm going to be presenting is preliminary data. It's been largely cleaned and partly weighted, but we received some information about a week ago that some of the weightings were slightly out and they're being corrected. And we haven't got that data yet, and I certainly wouldn't have had time to fix my slides. So the precise numbers, don't take a lot of notice of them, certainly the decimal places, but the general pattern won't change. The weighting won't have that much of a difference. The area where it may have a slight difference is with regard to age, because in 3 of the countries we've oversampled under 25-year-olds to try and increase the sample size there. And that needs a little of control. The reason for presenting preliminary data here is that things are changing so rapidly in this area that by the time you've collected your survey, your data's almost out of date. So waiting until this is all cleaned up and ready to present in peer-reviewed journals before we release it would mean that it was less relevant than it would be today. Most of what I'm going to be doing is focusing around the role of vaping with regard to quitting smoking, and I want to reiterate the point that several other people have made, that it's not simply a therapy to quit, it's partly or mainly a substitute. It's quite a different model, and thus some of the conventional approaches to assessing therapies are of limited utility in trying to understand what's happening in terms of vaping replacing smoking. The choices may involve, as people would know, the relative experience benefits, including enjoyment, perceived costs, both monetary and the worry about potential health consequences. So I'm going to be covering a range of things. I won't list them here in the interest of time. This is some data from where things have been in the past. As you can see, vaping has been increasing rapidly since we first started to assess it, with the UK and the US levels being much higher than the levels we've been able to find in Australia and Canada. Those of you who don't know, Canada and Australia, vaping is technically illegal under most circumstances, whereas in the US and the UK, it's not illegal. And that seems to be responsible for those differences. So you can see up to about 2014, any current use was about 12% in Australia and 27% in the UK. Slightly later, early 2015, it was about 30% in the US. This is what it is in 2016. The paler bars are any use, any current use, any reported current use, that is daily, weekly, or less often than weekly. And the darker bars are daily use. It's immediately apparent that Canada has shifted considerably. As people would be aware, even though it still remains illegal in Canada, Canada's taken a rather laissez-faire approach to the enforcement of its legislation, and basically it's de facto permitted. But so there's been a large increase in experimental use, but still less daily use than particularly in the US. But in all three countries, slightly over half of our sample were reporting some level of vaping. In Australia, it had gone up to about 26 or 27%. Again, quite a marked increase on what it was in 2014. One of the things I want to focus on in this presentation is dual use. I have believed for some time that dual use wasn't a particularly useful concept, and so we're doing some work to try and demonstrate its limitations. What we've got here is the 3x3 cross-tabulation of current daily use, current weekly use, or current occasional use, that is less than weekly, for smokers and vapers. And you can immediately see that current daily smoking and occasional vaping is nearly 40% of the sample. So these are people who are just trying it. They're not really dual users in any fundamental sense of the word. Another 17 or so % of current weekly vapers who are daily smokers, again, playing around a little bit more seriously, but hardly can be considered dual users. Around 20% of our sample are genuine dual users in terms of daily use. We haven't broken it down further, as somebody suggested in an earlier session, to look at the proportions within daily use. That's something that we intend to do in the future. Among current daily vapers, 6.2% are using cigarettes occasionally, and among the current occasional or weekly vapers, around 17% are also occasional vapers. And this is predominantly among young people. There seems to be a pattern of a bit of use of both. And I should point out that these data are on people who report having been daily smokers in the past. So have these people who report being daily smokers as young people, that must have been for a short period of time, and they've now got this pattern where they use a bit of both, and that's a pattern of nicotine use we've never seen before. There are really strong differences by age. Dual use declines with age, and the older people are more likely to have quit smoking. Higher SES, and it's not on the slide, are a little bit like the younger respondents. So those with higher SES are more likely to dual use, and women are a bit less likely to be dual daily users than men. So what are people's perceptions of harmfulness and addictiveness? Around just over a third of our sample believe that vaping is less addictive than smoking, and that varies considerably as a function of experience of vaping. Essentially, those who have any current experience of vaping, nearly half or somewhat over half believe that it's less addictive. those people who have no current experience, less than a quarter believe that it's less addictive. I think there's increasing evidence that vaping is less addictive than smoking, so this represents a misperception, a likely misperception by the relevant population. In terms of vaping being less harmful than smoking, we asked about vaping being less harmful than smoking and passive vaping being less harmful than passive smoking. It's notable that more people think passive vaping is much less harmful than active vaping across all of the categories, very similar rate. So about 30% believe passive vaping is much less harmful, whereas only about 22% believe that vaping is less harmful. Again, there are marked differences as a function of vaping status and also as a function of being whether they're a daily smoker or not. The non-regular users tend to be less convinced that it's less harmful, the more regular users more convinced. Several people have mentioned the decline in people's belief that it's much less harmful. Here's data from Australia and England, 2013 to 2016, just showing the magnitude of that extraordinary decline. We really should be ashamed of some of our colleagues who have contributed to this disastrous situation. Now I want to go briefly on to quitting related activity. If you can notice here that if I point, the percentage of people who report having made a quit attempt in the last year, among those who don't vape, it's about just over 50%, but amongst all of these vapor categories I've identified, it's around 70% or even 80% in the genuine dual user group. Vapers are clearly, people who are vaping are at least in part doing it because they're interested in quitting smoking. Again, if you look prospectively, are they planning to quit more? Are they wanting to quit more? And again, the answer is yes. There is some variation across groups, but the biggest difference is between those people who aren't using vaping products at all. What about their confidence in their ability to succeed? Interestingly, those who are non-vapers are less confident in their ability to succeed than those who are vaping, suggesting that the experience of vaping gives people some increased confidence in their ability to succeed and some perception that therefore the quitting isn't as hard as it might otherwise have been. This is in a context where if we look at a classical measure of dependence, although it's flawed for reasons I'm prepared to talk to people about later, time to first nicotine of the day. So for daily users, it was which was the soonest, whether they vape first or smoke first, what that time was. And you can see here again that the daily smoker non-vapers, the daily smokers, daily vapers are, vapers and non-smokers are, if anything, more addicted than the people who managed to quit by themselves. So there's a trend here, some of these differences aren't significant, but there's a trend in the opposite direction to what I was saying before. So in conventional situations, more addicted people tend to report less self-efficacy. What we're getting is a bit of a reversal here, that the vapers are reporting greater self-efficacy, and there's a tendency for them to be a little bit more addicted by this conventional measure. So are people using vaping in their quit attempts? Yes, the answer is, particularly in the countries where it's more prevalent. Over 50% reported using it in those three countries, and only a third in Australia. And most people were using tank systems, except in the United States where it was a bit lower. If we look at vaping and quitting by age, this is really very important, I think. If you look at the percentage of recent nicotine users who've quit, those under 25, it's just under 8%, whereas it's over 19% in the over 55s. And if you look at the daily vapers who have quit, only 7% of the daily vapers under 25 have quit smoking. The other 93% are dual using at some level, although a lot of that dual use isn't daily dual use. Compare that with the over 55s, where nearly half of those who are daily vapers have actually quit all forms of smoking. So older people are moving to using vaping very much to quit smoking. Younger people are playing around with it and aren't directed towards quitting quite so much. This is some data which was published recently, led by my colleague Bai Yong, showing an interaction between country and the success using vaping. This shows, just very briefly, that use of NRT to quit has same success rates in the countries with a more liberal environment, the US and the UK. It was vaping was associated with better outcomes, but worse outcomes in Canada and Australia. Some good news we have is that that's disappeared completely in our 2016 survey. There is no longer any interaction, and the use of vaping is significantly associated with better outcomes than any other approach to quitting. And not presented here is that most of that effect is due to the tank systems being superior to the non-tank systems. So, uses continue to increase. Most vaping isn't daily use, and we need to recognise that. There's a large amount of experimental use. Any vaping is associated with increased interest in quitting, greater confidence and ability to quit, although perhaps people who are moving to vaping may, as a group, be somewhat more dependent. And there's a gradation in beliefs of the extent of vaping and the extent of smoking. So the dual use category is a very heterogeneous category. At one end, those people who are predominantly vaping are very similar to sole vapers, and at the other end, those people who are just trying vaping are in some respects very similar to the people who aren't trying at all, although their beliefs in some cases are very different. So I've just said most of this, so I won't say it again. And I just remind people of the limitations of the data and not to use the precise estimates. I've stuck those things on all the slides since they're going to go up. So, conclusions, vaping appears to be here to stay. Public policy seems to be having a smaller effect than we might expect. It seems to have delayed the onset of vaping in Australia, particularly in Canada, but as it's the way in which it's implemented that seems to be having some effect, but the actual laws themselves don't seem to be having terribly much effect at all. And those people who think the law means that something doesn't happen if it's against the law should look closely at this data. Concept of dual use is useless. We should try to get away from dual use. If we're going to talk about dual use, it has to be at least daily dual use. Current vaping doesn't appear to be good enough to kill off smoking, especially among the young, where the need to quit is less urgent. And the question I would have is, can we push more to quit with improved policies, or do we need to rely on the new products that are coming out, which for the most part appear to be slightly less potentially harmful than vaping, but perhaps more attractive to consumers? Thank you. Sorry for joining.